My stepmom pushed me down the stairs and faked my suicide to steal my inheritance. I sent her to prison. 10 years later, she's out and wants to catch up. My mom died from cancer when I was 13 and my dad remarried way too fast. Linda seemed perfect at first with her Pinterest boards and organic meal plans. She'd post these long captions about being blessed to have a bonus daughter while my dad worked night shifts at the hospital. But the second his car left the driveway, she'd make me scrub the baseboards until my knees bruised. She'd stand over me critiquing every stroke and comparing me to her biological daughter Chloe, who visited on weekends. The night everything changed started like any other. Dad had just left for his shift, and Linda appeared in my doorway saying, "Time for your chores." I told her I had a huge test the next day and asked to do extra on Saturday instead. Her face went completely still. Then she smiled. "Of course, dear. You need your rest." I should have known something was wrong, but I was just proud of myself for finally setting a boundary. I texted my best friend Sarah about standing up to Linda and went to bed feeling hopeful. I woke up at the bottom of our stairs with paramedics shining lights in my eyes. Linda was sobbing dramatically, telling anyone who'd listen how she'd found me. She must have been sleepwalking, she kept saying. She's been so depressed since her mother died. I tried to tell them I never sleepwalk, but everyone just exchanged these knowing looks. At the hospital, Linda pulled the doctor aside, and I heard her mention my previous attempts at self-harm, which was a complete lie. But she showed him these scratches on my arms from her cat, and suddenly I was the troubled teen who threw herself down the stairs for attention. The fall messed up my back bad. I developed scoliosis and this constant pain that made it hard to focus. Linda used it as an excuse to isolate me from everyone. She'd cancel my doctor appointment saying I was being dramatic. She told my dad the pain was all in my head from grief. He believed her because he was never home to see me crying from muscle spasms. For my 18th birthday, Linda announced she was throwing me a huge healing celebration. She hired a professional photographer and made this whole slideshow about my journey. She invited all our relatives and gave this speech about how hard it's been caring for me through my difficulties. Everyone applauded while I sat there in pain, realizing this was all calculated. I went into her office for some space. That's when I found the papers on her desk about becoming my medical proxy. There were also letters from my maternal grandmother that Linda had been hiding. My grandma had been trying to get custody, but Linda convinced my dad she was toxic. Everything clicked into place. Linda needed everyone to see her as the devoted stepmother, in case I ever tried to report her. While the party went on upstairs, I snuck into the basement where Mom's things were stored. Hidden in an old paint box, I found her journal. One entry made my blood run cold. "If anything happens to me, protect our daughter from those who would use her pain for their gain." There was also information about a trust fund Mom set up that Linda had been hiding. At the bottom was a business card for Mom's lawyer. I recorded Linda on my phone telling Chloe, "Once I'm her medical proxy, we can finally access everything." Then I texted the lawyer from Sarah's phone and sent her all the evidence I'd gathered over the years. The next hour was a blur. The lawyer showed up at the party with my grandmother and 2 police officers. Linda tried to play innocent, but they had warrants. Turns out she'd done this before to her first husband. As they led her away in handcuffs, my dad finally broke down and apologized for not believing me. I moved in with my grandmother that night. For the first time in years, I felt safe. She got me proper medical treatment, and slowly the pain became manageable. I started college and even made new friends who didn't know my story. 6 months later, I was studying in my dorm when my dad called. His voice was shaking. Linda made bail and disappeared. Her lawyer can't reach her. I asked what this had to do with me. He said, "She called asking weird questions about your recovery, about your doctors and physical therapy schedule." My stomach dropped. The first weird thing happened 2 days later. I was leaving my morning psych class when I spotted Chloe sitting on a bench outside. She was just staring at me. I hadn't seen her since Linda got arrested. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unwashed and tangled. I tried to walk past, but she stood up and blocked my path. She told me I ruined her mother's life. I said her mother ruined mine first. She laughed and said I had no idea what was coming. Then she just walked away. I figured she was upset about her mom, so I didn't report it. That night, I found a note under my dorm room door. It said I was an ungrateful liar who destroyed a good woman. The handwriting looked like Chloe's. The same loopy letters I remembered from the birthday cards Linda made her sign for me. I showed it to my roommate Emma, but she said it was probably just someone pranking me. The next morning, there was another note. This one had details about my class schedule. It mentioned which building I'd be in at what time. Now I was getting scared. I called my dad, but he said Chloe was probably just processing her emotions. He suggested I give her space. I tried calling my grandmother, but she was at her book club, so I went to campus security instead. The guy at the desk barely looked up from his phone. He said unless there was an actual threat, they couldn't do anything. A schedule wasn't threatening enough, apparently. I left feeling more vulnerable than ever. Over the next week, the notes got worse. One had a picture of me walking to the library. Another mentioned my physical therapy appointments. The photo was grainy, but I could make out my purple backpack and the limp I still had from my back injury. Chloe was following me everywhere. I started taking different routes to class. I'd duck into random buildings to lose her. My friends noticed I was jumpy, but I didn't want to explain the whole Linda situation. I'd catch glimpses of her blonde hair in my peripheral vision, and my heart would race. Then Chloe escalated things. She showed up at the campus coffee shop where I studied with my friend group. She sat at the next table and started talking loudly on her phone. She was telling someone about this girl who lied about her stepmother abusing her. How this girl was so jealous of the stepmother's real daughter that she made up stories. My friends kept glancing between us. I grabbed my stuff and left, but the damage was done. The coffee I'd been drinking turned sour in my stomach. The next day, my friend Melissa asked if I knew that girl from the coffee shop. I tried to explain, but it sounded crazy even to me. Melissa said Chloe had messaged her on Instagram with screenshots of old social media posts. Posts where Linda talked about how difficult I was, how I refused to accept her love. Of course, there were no posts about Linda making me clean until I bled. Melissa showed me the messages on her phone. Chloe had created this whole narrative about me being a manipulative liar who couldn't handle her father remarrying. She'd even included photos from that birthday party, showing Linda's tearful speech about supporting me through my troubles. I realized then that Chloe wasn't just angry. She was executing a plan, just like her mother had done. She was building a case against me, making me look unstable and untrustworthy before whatever came next. The pattern was so familiar it made my skin crawl. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my stepsister was telling people I lied? They'd probably take one look at my history and dismiss me just like everyone else had. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I kept checking the locks on my door and peeking through the blinds. Around 3 in the morning, I saw a figure standing under the streetlight outside my dorm. Even from 4 floors up, I recognized Chloe's silhouette. She stood there for an hour, just watching my window. When I finally worked up the courage to look again, she was gone. But I knew she'd be back. This was far from over. The next morning, I found another note slipped under my door, this time with a single line that chilled me to the bone. Mother sends her regards. My hands trembled as I held the paper, knowing that Linda was out there somewhere, orchestrating everything through her daughter. I called my grandmother right away. She answered on the second ring even though it was barely 6 in the morning. The sky outside my dorm window was still dark, with just a hint of purple creeping along the horizon. I could hear the concern in her voice immediately. She knew I wouldn't call this early unless something was seriously wrong. I told her everything about Chloe and the notes, my words tumbling out in a rush. She went quiet for a long moment, and I could picture her sitting in her kitchen, probably already dressed for the day in one of her floral house dresses, processing what I'd just told her. Then she said she was hiring someone to look into this. I asked what she meant, confused by her sudden decisiveness. She said a private investigator, someone who could figure out what Linda and Chloe were really up to. Her voice had that steel edge I remembered from when she'd stood up to my school principal in 3rd grade. Within 2 hours, she'd already made the arrangements, calling in favors from her vast network of friends and acquaintances. The investigator's name was Wayne. He showed up at my dorm that afternoon looking like any other dad visiting his kid. Gray hair cut short and neat, polo shirt tucked into khakis, comfortable walking shoes, nothing that would make anyone look twice. He even carried a campus map like a confused parent trying to find their way around. He knocked on my door with a specific pattern my grandmother had told me to expect. When I let him in, he immediately scanned my room, taking in the windows, the lock on the door, even checking the closet. He asked me to walk him through everything, his voice calm and professional. I showed him all the notes I'd kept, stored in a shoebox under my bed. My hands shook as I laid them out on my desk. He took photos of each one with his phone, adjusting the angle to avoid glare from my desk lamp. He asked about my daily routine, my classes, where I went for physical therapy, what route I took to the library. He wrote everything down in this little notebook with a worn leather cover, his handwriting surprisingly neat. Then he told me to keep living normally, but stay alert. He'd handle the rest. Before he left, he gave me his card with just a phone number, no name or business listed. That same day, I had physical therapy at the campus health center. The building was a modern glass and brick structure on the north side of campus, always busy with students coming and going. My therapist Dennis had been working with me for months to undo the damage from Linda's friend. He was in his 40s, with kind eyes and infinite patience as I struggled through exercises that should have been simple. He was the first medical professional who actually listened when I described my pain, never dismissing it as being all in my head like others had. We worked on strengthening my core and improving my balance, things that had been compromised since my fall. As I was leaving the session, still slightly sweaty and sore, I noticed Chloe in the parking lot. She was standing near a blue Honda, talking to someone on her phone and taking pictures of the building. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore oversized sunglasses even though the day was overcast. I ducked behind a car, my heart hammering, and texted Wayne immediately. He replied within seconds that he was already on it. I stayed crouched there for another minute before carefully making my way back to my dorm via a longer route. The next few days were tense but quiet. No new notes appeared under my door or tucked into my backpack. Chloe wasn't at her usual stalking spots. The bench outside the library, the coffee cart near the science building, the tables outside the student union. I started to relax a little, though I still checked over my shoulder constantly. Maybe Wayne had scared her off somehow. I even went to a study group without constantly looking over my shoulder, actually managing to focus on organic chemistry for more than 5 minutes at a time. My friend Ethan, who sat next to me in most of our pre-med classes, asked if I was feeling better. He'd noticed how jumpy I'd been lately. I said yeah, things were looking up, and for the first time in weeks I actually meant it. I should have known it was too good to last. Peace never lasted long when Linda was involved. Friday afternoon, I got a call from the health center. I was in my room, halfway through a sandwich and reviewing notes for my anatomy exam. The receptionist said there was an issue with my insurance. Her voice sounded strained, like she was dealing with something outside her usual routine. Someone had called claiming to be me and tried to cancel my physical therapy coverage. They needed me to come in person to verify my identity and sort out the confusion. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped my sandwich. Mustard splattered across my notes. I knew exactly who that someone was. I called Wayne and told him what happened, trying to keep my voice steady. He said to go to the appointment, but he'd be nearby. He told me to act normally, not to let on that I suspected anything. I changed into a clean shirt, my hands still trembling as I buttoned it. At the health center, the receptionist Beverly looked confused and slightly frazzled. She was an older woman who'd always been kind to me, remembering my name and asking about my classes. She said the caller had known all my information, my birthday, my insurance ID number, even my social security number. The only reason they flagged it was because the voice sounded different from mine, higher pitched and with a slight accent I didn't have. She pulled up the call log on her computer, her manicured nails clicking on the keyboard. The number was blocked, but they'd recorded it for security purposes, a new policy they'd implemented after some recent identity theft issues on campus. When she played it, I heard Chloe trying to disguise her voice, making it sound older and more authoritative. She was asking about my treatment schedule, claiming she needed to coordinate with a specialist. She was trying to get copies of my medical records sent to a new address, rattling off a P.O. box across town. Wayne appeared at the desk like he'd been there the whole time, probably having entered through another door. He showed Beverly some kind of credentials. I caught a glimpse of an official-looking ID with his photo. He asked for a copy of that recording, explaining he was investigating a case of medical identity theft. Beverly hesitated, clearly uncertain about protocol, but then made him a copy on a USB drive she pulled from her desk drawer. He thanked her and guided me outside with a gentle hand on my elbow. In the parking lot, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he told me this was bigger than just harassment. Someone was trying to access my medical benefits, possibly to file fraudulent claims or redirect payments. He needed to dig deeper into Linda's past, to see if this was part of a pattern. He asked if I could stay with someone for the weekend while he investigated. I called my dad, but he was working a double shift at the hospital, so I texted my grandmother and she said to come right away, to pack a bag and drive carefully. The drive to my grandmother's house took 2 hours through winding country roads. The familiar route should have been calming, but I kept checking my mirrors for Chloe's car. Every blonde driver made my pulse spike. Every blue Honda made me grip the steering wheel tighter. I took a few random turns, doubling back once just to be sure no one was following me. When I finally pulled into my grandmother's driveway, gravel crunching under my tires, she was already waiting on the porch. The sight of her, small but fierce in her lavender cardigan, made my eyes burn with unshed tears. She hugged me tight, enveloping me in the scent of her rose perfume, and led me inside. Her house smelled like cinnamon and safety, like the snickerdoodles she'd been baking. She'd made up my mom's old room for me, with fresh sheets that smelled like lavender fabric softener. Seeing those familiar walls, still painted the soft yellow my mom had chosen in high school, made me want to cry. She told me Wayne had already called with an update. What he'd found was worse than we thought. She wouldn't tell me the details yet, just held me while I finally let myself break down. Wayne came by the next morning with a thick folder tucked under his arm. The kitchen table had been cleared of my grandmother's usual collection of magazines and mail. He spread papers across the polished wood surface, organizing them into neat piles. Linda had done this before, not just once with her first husband, but 2 other times that he'd been able to document. The pattern was always the same, like she was following a twisted playbook. She'd marry someone with a sick or deceased spouse, presenting herself as a caring, supportive partner. She'd isolate their children through manipulation and sometimes violence. Then she'd become their medical proxy and drain their insurance benefits or trust funds. In one case, she'd collected disability payments for a stepson for 3 years after he'd moved out of state. The boy, Peter, had no idea until the IRS came after him for fraud. He'd spent years trying to clear his name, his credit destroyed in the process. The second case was even worse, making my stomach churn as Wayne laid out the details. A girl named Kelly had actually been pushed down the stairs just like me. The similarities were eerie. The same kind of injury. The same gaslighting afterward. Linda had convinced everyone the girl was suicidal, had even produced a fake diary with forged entries about depression. She'd been put in a psychiatric facility for 2 months while Linda cleaned out her college fund, every penny her late mother had saved. The girl's aunt had fought for years to prove what happened, hiring lawyers and investigators, but Linda had disappeared before anything could stick. Wayne had tracked down both families through painstaking research. They'd been looking for Linda for years, comparing notes on online forums for fraud victims. My grandmother asked how Chloe fit into all this, her voice sharp with anger. Wayne pulled out more papers, including what looked like old foster care documents. Chloe wasn't Linda's biological daughter like we'd thought. She was another victim who developed something like Stockholm Syndrome. Her real parents had died in a car accident when she was 8. Linda had been her foster mother and had groomed her into being an accomplice over the course of a decade. The weekend visits I'd always assumed were custody arrangements had actually been training sessions. Chloe had been taught to gather information, to manipulate records, to play the perfect daughter. She was 18 now, but completely under Linda's control, psychologically dependent on her approval. Wayne showed us Chloe's old school records, which showed a bright, happy child before Linda, and the gradual decline afterward. I felt sick, my grandmother's strong coffee turning to acid in my stomach. All those times I'd been jealous of Chloe, thinking she was the favored daughter getting special treatment. She'd been a prisoner too, just a different kind. Wayne said he'd found evidence that Linda was using Chloe to access my disability benefits through a complex series of forms and false claims. There were forms filed in my name for benefits I'd never applied for, signatures that looked like mine but weren't quite right. The payments were going to an account I didn't recognize, registered to a shell company with a generic name. They'd already collected thousands of dollars over the past 6 months. My grandmother slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. She said this ended now, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 3 children and wouldn't tolerate any more nonsense. Wayne had a plan, laid out with military precision. He'd contacted the other families Linda had scammed through a network of fraud investigators. They were willing to work together, pooling resources and information. We needed to catch Linda in the act, get irrefutable proof she was directing Chloe. The problem was Linda was too smart to show her face, too experienced at this game. She was using Chloe as a shield, staying hidden while her victim-turned accomplice took all the risks. We needed to flip Chloe somehow, make her see that Linda was using her too. It sounded impossible. How do you deprogram someone who's been manipulated for 10 years? How do you make them see the truth when lies are all they've known? I went back to campus on Monday with Wayne's assurance that he'd have someone watching. He wouldn't tell me who, said it was better if I didn't know so I wouldn't accidentally look for them. I tried to act normal, but I was constantly on edge, jumping at shadows and unexpected noises. During lunch, I saw Chloe in the cafeteria. She was sitting alone at a corner table, picking at a salad without really eating. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair hanging limp. I made a decision that Wayne probably wouldn't approve of. I grabbed my tray, my hands surprisingly steady, and sat down across from her. She looked up, startled, her fork clattering to her plate. I told her I knew about Linda's other families. Her face went pale, all color draining away. I kept talking before she could leave, the words coming out in a rush. I told her about Peter and Kelly, about the years of trauma Linda had caused, how Linda had used them and thrown them away when she was done. I said I knew she wasn't Linda's real daughter, that Linda had taken her from her real family who'd loved her, that Linda had lied about her parents abandoning her. Chloe's hands started shaking, making her water glass tremble. She said I didn't know anything, that I was making things up, but her voice cracked, uncertainty creeping in. I pulled out my phone and showed her the documents Wayne had given me copies of, her foster care records with her real last name, her real parents' obituaries, describing them as loving people who'd died tragically young, the police report from when Linda first got custody, full of inconsistencies. Chloe stared at the screen like she was seeing a ghost, her face crumpling. She started crying right there in the cafeteria, not delicate tears but ugly body-shaking sobs. People were staring, whispering, but I didn't care. I told her Linda was using her just like she'd used me, just like she'd used Peter and Kelly, that when Linda was done, when the heat got too much, She'd disappear and leave Chloe to take the fall, just like she'd done before, leaving a trail of damaged lives behind her. Chloe kept shaking her head, mumbling no, over and over. But I could see the doubt creeping in, years of careful programming starting to crack. She whispered that Linda said I was lying, that I'd made everything up to hurt them, that Linda had saved her, given her a home. I asked her why Linda was hiding then, why she never showed her face in public anymore, why she was making Chloe do all the dirty work, take all the risks. Chloe didn't have an answer, just stared at her untouched salad. I gave her Wayne's number, writing it on a napkin with a shaking hand, and told her to call when she was ready to hear the truth. Then I left her there crying into her salad, though every instinct told me to stay and comfort her. It was harsh, but I didn't have time for gentle. That afternoon, Wayne called me furious. He'd seen the whole thing on the security cameras he'd been monitoring through his contacts. He said I'd taken a huge risk, that I could have ruined everything. I said sometimes you have to take risks, that Chloe was a victim too and deserved a chance. He grumbled but admitted Chloe had looked shaken, more vulnerable than they'd ever seen her. Maybe it would work. Maybe we'd planted enough doubt. 2 days passed with no word from Chloe. I was starting to think I'd made things worse, that she'd run straight to Linda and blown our whole operation. I barely slept, checking my phone constantly. Then Wednesday night, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Chloe. Her voice was tiny, scared, like a lost child. She said Linda had been lying to her for years. She'd looked up Peter and Kelly herself, found their social media profiles full of posts about surviving abuse, seen their posts about what Linda had done, the years of therapy they'd needed. Everything I'd said was true. She wanted out but didn't know how. Linda monitored everything she did, checked her phone, tracked her location. I told her to meet me at the campus church the next morning. It was the one place Linda wouldn't think to look, too public and too holy for her schemes. I brought Wayne with me to the meeting. The church was quiet, morning light streaming through stained glass windows. Chloe showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days, her designer clothes wrinkled and her makeup smudged. She was clutching a backpack like her life depended on it, knuckles white with tension. When she saw Wayne, she almost ran, taking a step backward toward the door. I told her he was there to help, that we both were, that she wasn't alone anymore. She sat down in the last pew, as far from the altar as possible, and started talking. The words poured out like a dam breaking, years of secrets and pain flooding out, years of manipulation and control, of being told she was worthless without Linda. Linda had told her that her real parents had abandoned her, sold her for substance money, that no one else would ever want her, that she was damaged goods, that Chloe owed her everything for taking in such a burden. Chloe pulled papers from her backpack with shaking hands, bank statements showing the fraudulent accounts, forged documents with Linda's notes in the margins, recordings on her phone of Linda coaching her on what to say. Linda had made her keep records of everything in case they needed to blackmail someone, never realizing she was creating evidence against herself. Instead, Chloe was turning it all over to us. There were details about the other families Linda had targeted, some we didn't even know about, contact information for victims across 3 states, and most importantly, evidence of where Linda was hiding. She was staying at a rundown motel 2 towns over, paying cash weekly, directing everything from room 237. She only contacted Chloe through burner phones, always paranoid about being traced. Wayne took the evidence with gloved hands, treating it like the precious proof it was, and made some calls. Within an hour, he'd coordinated with the other families and their investigators. They'd all been looking for Linda for years, sharing information and false leads. Now they knew exactly where she was. But we needed to be careful. If Linda got spooked, if she sensed the walls closing in, she'd run again, disappear into another identity, another state, another family to destroy. We needed her to think everything was still going according to plan. Wayne told Chloe she'd have to go back and act normal for just one more day. Chloe looked terrified, her whole body trembling, but agreed. She understood this was the only way to end it. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept thinking about Chloe going back to Linda, walking back into that motel room. What if Linda suspected something? What if she hurt Chloe? Linda had already proven she was capable of violence. My grandmother made me chamomile tea, but I couldn't drink it. My stomach too knotted with worry. She sat with me on the couch, rubbing my back like she had when I was little. I'd hated Chloe for so long, seen her as the enemy, but now I just felt sorry for her. We were both Linda's victims, just in different ways. I texted her to stay strong, adding that she wasn't alone anymore. She sent back a single heart emoji that somehow conveyed everything she couldn't say. The next morning, Wayne called with the plan. The other families were driving in from across the state. They'd all meet at the police station to present their evidence together, a united front of Linda's victims. The detective assigned to the case had been briefed and was taking it seriously. Chloe would get Linda to meet her at a restaurant in town, supposedly to collect more forged documents and discuss their next target. The police would be waiting, both inside as undercover diners and outside in unmarked cars. It sounded simple, but I knew Linda was smart, had evaded capture for years. One wrong move and she'd smell a trap. I wanted to be there, to see Linda finally face justice, but Wayne said absolutely not. It was too dangerous, and my presence might tip Linda off. I spent the morning pacing my dorm room, wearing a path in the thin carpet. Emma kept asking what was wrong, concerned by my obvious anxiety. How do you tell someone your evil stepmother is about to be arrested in a sting operation? That sounded like something out of a bad TV movie. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, my phone buzzed. It was Wayne, just 2 words. Got her. I sank onto my bed and started crying, months of tension finally releasing. It was really over. Linda was in custody, would finally face justice for everything she'd done, or so I thought, because Linda had one more card to play, and none of us saw it coming. Even in custody, even facing years of evidence, she had one final manipulation that would shake everything we thought we knew. I got the call from Wayne an hour later. His voice was different, tense in a way I'd never heard before. He said Linda was demanding to talk to me. The detective thought it might help their case if I agreed. I said no way. I wasn't going anywhere near her. But Wayne said she claimed to have information about my mom's death. My whole body went cold. I told him that was impossible. Mom died of cancer. He said Linda was insisting she had proof of something else. The detective thought she was bluffing but wanted me to decide. I drove to the police station with my hands shaking on the wheel. The building was this ugly concrete block downtown, all fluorescent lights and worn linoleum. Wayne met me in the lobby along with a detective named Gray. They explained Linda would be behind glass, that I'd be safe. I could leave anytime I wanted. They'd be recording everything. I nodded, but my mouth was too dry to speak. They led me down a hallway that smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Linda looked smaller than I remembered. She sat in an orange jumpsuit with her hands cuffed to the table. Her perfect hair was flat and greasy. No makeup to hide the lines around her eyes. When she saw me, she smiled. That same fake smile from all those years. She said I looked good, healthier than when she'd last seen me. I didn't respond, just sat down across the glass. She leaned forward and said, "My mother's cancer wasn't what killed her." I told her to stop lying, that I was done with her games. But she kept talking. She said she'd found my mom's medical records while going through Dad's files. There were inconsistencies in the treatment notes, medications that didn't match the type of cancer she had. She'd done research, talked to medical professionals using her connections. My mom's death had been suspicious, but no one had looked into it because everyone assumed it was just cancer. Linda pulled out a folder she'd somehow been allowed to keep. Inside were photocopies of medical documents with highlighted sections, different doctors' signatures that didn't match, treatment plans that made no sense. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't stop looking at those papers. Linda said she'd been planning to use this information as leverage if I ever tried to expose her. But now that everything was ruined anyway, I might as well know the truth. She said to look at who benefited from my mom's death, who got the life insurance payout, who suddenly had no obstacles to marrying my dad. I said that was her, obviously. She laughed and said no, she came later. Someone else had cleared the path first. My dad's first girlfriend after Mom died, Beverly, the one who'd lasted 6 months before Linda showed up. I barely remembered her, just a vague impression of blonde hair and too much perfume. Linda said Beverly had been a nurse at the hospital where Mom was treated. She'd had access to Mom's medications, her IV lines, everything. After Mom died, Beverly had tried to get Dad to marry her quickly. When he said it was too soon, she'd gotten desperate and sloppy. That's when Linda had swooped in, playing the perfect supportive partner. Beverly had left town shortly after. I told Linda this was insane, that she was making things up, but she had names, dates, shift schedules. She'd kept it all as insurance, her own twisted backup plan. She said to check the hospital records myself, look up Beverly's employment history, see when her shifts aligned with Mom's worst days, track where Beverly went after leaving town. She'd done the same thing 2 more times in different states. Linda might be a monster, but she wasn't the only one out there. I left that room feeling like the ground had shifted under me. Wayne and Detective Gray tried to talk to me, but I couldn't process anything. I drove home on autopilot, my mind spinning. Was it possible? Had Mom been murdered and we'd never known? I called my dad from the parking lot of a gas station, told him everything Linda had said. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said Beverly had always made him uncomfortable. Little things that didn't add up. How she'd known details about our family she shouldn't have. How eager she'd been to help with Mom's care even before they'd started dating. We spent the next week investigating Linda's claims. Dad pulled strings at the hospital to get Mom's complete records. Wayne helped track down Beverly's history. What we found made me sick. Beverly had worked at 3 hospitals where patients with terminal illnesses had died unexpectedly. Always wealthy patients with good life insurance. She'd never been caught because she was careful, using medications that mimicked natural disease progression. She'd moved on before anyone could connect the dots. Except Linda had connected them, recognized a fellow predator. The police opened a new investigation, but Beverly had vanished years ago. Her trail went cold in Oregon where she'd worked at another hospital under a different name. More mysterious deaths followed her there too. They put out alerts, but she'd probably changed her identity again. Meanwhile, Linda sat in jail almost gleeful that she'd ruined one more life on her way down. She'd planted this poison seed that would grow forever. Even locked up, she'd found a way to hurt me one last time. The other families Linda had scammed came to town for her hearing. Peter flew in from Colorado, still dealing with the IRS mess she'd created. Kelly drove up from Texas with her aunt who'd fought so hard for her. There were others too, people Wayne had found during his investigation. A whole support group of Linda's victims. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse to compare stories. Everyone had similar experiences but different details. Linda had adapted her approach based on each family's weaknesses. Chloe showed up halfway through the meeting. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her. She'd cut her hair short and dyed it brown, trying to look less like the girl Linda had created. She sat next to me and grabbed my hand under the table. We didn't need to talk. We both understood what the other had been through. The meeting helped in a weird way. Seeing all these people who'd survived Linda made me feel less alone, less crazy for what had happened to me. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Linda pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and assault. With all the evidence from multiple states, her lawyer had advised against fighting it. She got 15 years, eligible for parole in 10. It didn't feel like enough for all the pain she'd caused, but at least she couldn't hurt anyone else for a while. Dad came to the hearing, sitting in the back row. He looked older, defeated by everything he'd learned. He'd believed Linda's lies about me for so long, chosen her over his own daughter. That guilt would never fully go away. After the hearing, Chloe and I went for coffee. Real coffee this time, not the watered-down stuff from the courthouse machine. She told me she was starting therapy, trying to undo years of Linda's programming. She'd enrolled in community college, planning to become a social worker. She wanted to help kids in foster care, make sure no one else ended up like her. I told her about my plans for medical school, how I wanted to specialize in pain management, help people whose pain was dismissed like mine had been. We stayed in touch after that. Not close friends exactly, but bonded by shared trauma. She'd text me updates on her progress. Small victories like passing her first semester or standing up to someone who tried to manipulate her. I'd share my own wins, like getting accepted to a pre-med program or finally being able to do yoga without back pain. We were both rebuilding our lives from the ground up. My grandmother became my rock through everything. She helped me process not just Linda's abuse but the possibility of Mom's murder. We went through old photos together, remembering the good times before everything went wrong. She told me stories about Mom I'd never heard, how strong she'd been, how much she'd loved me, how proud she'd be that I survived and fought back. Grandma also helped me reconnect with Mom's side of the family, people Linda had kept me away from. Dad and I started therapy together. It was awkward at first, sitting in those uncomfortable chairs trying to talk about feelings. He'd never been good at that stuff, but slowly we worked through the walls Linda had built between us. He told me about his guilt over Mom's death, how Linda had exploited that vulnerability, how she'd convinced him I was troubled, that he was helping by letting her handle me. He cried when I told him about the stairs, about the pain I'd endured. Real, ugly crying that showed how much he'd been holding in. 6 months after Linda's arrest, I got a call from Detective Gray. They'd found Beverly. She'd been working at a nursing home in Washington under another fake identity. More suspicious deaths had followed her there. Elderly patients with good insurance who'd died just a little too conveniently. They arrested her based on the pattern of deaths and Linda's evidence. She was facing multiple murder charges across 4 states. Mom's case would be part of it, though proving murder after so many years was nearly impossible. I went to Beverly's trial with Dad. Seeing her in person was surreal. She looked so normal, like someone's aunt or a friendly neighbor, not like someone who'd culled my mother and who knows how many others. The prosecution laid out the pattern of deaths, the financial motives, the access she'd had. Linda testified via video link from prison, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. Even in an orange jumpsuit, she managed to seem smug. The jury found Beverly guilty on 8 counts. Life without parole. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something shift. Not closure exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Mom was still gone. I'd still suffered years of abuse. But the truth was out now. Both monsters who'd hurt my family were behind bars. I could stop looking over my shoulder, stop waiting for the next attack. I could just be a normal college student worried about exams and dating instead of survival. I graduated last month with my bachelor's degree. Dad, Grandma, and even Chloe came to the ceremony. Wayne sent a card saying he was proud of me. I'm starting medical school in the fall, finally pursuing the dream Linda had tried to steal. I still have bad days. Sometimes my back acts up and I remember those nights crying on the basement floor. Sometimes I have nightmares about stairs. But I also have good days now. Days where I forget to be afraid. Days where I can just exist without constantly watching for threats. I know Linda gets out eventually. 10 years if she behaves herself. But I'll be ready. I'm not that scared teenager anymore. I have support, evidence, and the knowledge that I survived her once. She has no power over me now. Same with Beverly, rotting in her cell. They're just bad chapters in my story, not the whole book. I get to write the rest myself, and I'm going to make it a good one. Not because of them or in spite of them, but because I deserve it. Because Mom would want me to live fully, not just survive. Last week I was cleaning out some old boxes and found a photo from that awful birthday party. There I was, frozen smile while Linda gave her performance. But now I could see what I'd missed then. In the background, barely visible, was my friend Sarah looking concerned. My dad checking his phone, probably wishing he could leave for work. Even some relatives looking uncomfortable with Linda's show. I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. People had seen something was wrong, even if they didn't know what to do about it. That photo used to make me angry. Now it just makes me grateful for how far I've come. Chloe called yesterday. She's graduating with her associate's degree and got accepted to a 4-year program. She's dating someone nice who knows her whole story and doesn't care. She sounds happy. Really happy. For the first time since I've known her. We made plans to get coffee when she's in town. Not to talk about Linda or the past, just to catch up like normal people do. Because that's what we are now. Just normal people who survived something awful and came out the other side. Damaged maybe, but not broken. Never broken.